All right, chapter 16 of generosity and parsimony. Parsimony, Parsimony. To begin with the first of these qualities, I propose that it is good to be thought generous, and yet generosity pursued in a way that makes people perceive you as generous will harm you. Because if you exercise generosity in all modesty, as is appropriate, it will not be recognized, and you will not be able to avoid the reputation of miserliness. Hence, if one wishes to be perceived as generous among men, one will have to indulge in a great deal of sumptuous display. A prince who chooses this path will consume all his resources and eventually will have to overburden the populace with taxes, extort money from them, and do whatever else is necessary to raise money to maintain his reputation for being generous. This will make him hateful to his subjects, and should he become poor, despised by all. So a prince who chooses this path will consume all his resources and eventually will have to overburden the populace with taxes, extort money from them, and do whatever else is necessary to raise money to maintain his reputation for being generous. This will make him hateful to his subjects, and should he become poor, despised by all. With his generosity he will have hurt many and rewarded few. He will be vulnerable to the slightest unrest and fall prey to the first danger. When the prince who has chosen this path realizes this, his impulse is to draw back, which quickly brings him a reputation for miserliness. Or like Indian giver, like, Therefore, a wise prince, seeing that he is unable to practice ostentatious generosity without harming himself, must not mind acquiring a reputation for miserliness. With time, he will come to be considered generous once people see that his parsimony has produced sufficient funds and enabled him to defend himself from those who make war on him, and to launch campaigns without burdening the populace. In this way, he will be considered generous by the great number of men from whom he takes nothing. And miserly by the few to whom he gives nothing. Okay, this is important. In this way, he will be considered generous by the great number of men from whom he takes nothing. Because he has his own. He's not always giving it away. And miserly by the few to whom he gives nothing. In our times, we have seen great deeds accomplished only by those who were considered miserly. All the others came to ruin. Pope Julius II, though he made use of his reputation for generosity to gain the papacy, he did not strive to maintain it afterward. This was so that he could wage wars. The present King of France has launched many wars without imposing extra taxes on his people, which he has been able to do only because the additional expenditures have been provided for by his long parsimony. Being kind of like not greedy, but just smart with your money, not, it's not being careless, So the present King of France has launched many wars without imposing extra taxes, which he has been able to do by using his provided by his long parsimony, only because the additional expenditures have been provided for by his long parsimony. The present King of Spain, had he been considered generous, could not have undertaken or won so many campaigns. Consequently, a prince must care little about gaining a reputation for parsimony, if he does not want to rob his subjects and yet wishes to be able to defend himself without becoming poor and contemptible or being forced to become rapacious. Okay, consequently, a prince must care little about gaining a reputation for parsimony, if he does not want to rob his subjects and yet wishes to be able to defend himself without becoming poor and contemptible or being forced to become rapacious. Parsimony is one of the vices that permit him to reign. Were someone to argue that Caesar acquired his empire through generosity, and that many others achieved the highest ranks because they were generous and were seen as such, my answer is either you are already a prince or you are on your way to becoming one. In the first case, such generosity is damaging. In the second, it is quite necessary to be considered generous. Caesar was one of those who wanted to rule Rome. However, had he survived after he gained his principality and not tempered his spending, he would have destroyed Rome. But were someone to counter that, there have been many princes who were considered most generous and who did great things with their armies, I would reply. A prince spends either his own wealth or that of his subjects or of others. In the first case, he must be frugal, while in the second he must show every generosity. A prince who rides out with his army, sustaining himself by looting, sackling, and plundering, controlling the assets of others, such a prince needs to be generous, otherwise his soldiers will not follow him. And it is easier to be a generous giver when the possessions you are giving away are not your own or those of your subjects. Cyrus, Caesar, and Alexander were of this class. Spending what belongs to others does not diminish your standing, but increases it. Only spending what is your own harms you. There is nothing that consumes itself like generosity. The more you use it, the more you lose the capacity of using it. You either become poor and disdained, or to escape poverty, rapacious and hated. Okay, you either become poor and disdained, or to escape poverty, rapacious and hatred, and hated. There is nothing a prince must avoid more than being at once disdained and hated, and generosity leads to both. It is therefore wiser to settle for a reputation of miserliness. It's miser, M-I-S-E-R-L-I-N-E-S-S, miser. Like, just save all the time, which incurs disdain without hatred, than to try to gain a reputation for generosity that brings with it a reputation for rapacity, incurring disdain with hatred. Because I guess trying to be too generous could become an ego thing. And also, once you stop helping people, and you get more and more success, they're gonna be upset. So I think that's what he's discussing. So this guy sat there and thought real deep, man. Niccolo Machiavelli. Peace.